afternoon, and welcome to the 2021 Milwaukee Film Festival presented by Associated Bank. I'm Kara. I am the artistic director at Milwaukee Film, and you are tuned in for our panel, The Carceral State. This panel brings together two films, Since I've Been Down and When Claude Got Shot, to explore conversations around carceral justice, particularly as it concerns the disproportionate impact on young Black men, but also sort of putting Washington State and Wisconsin kind of in a conversation around some of the political structures around incarceration. Washington and Wisconsin have a number of things in common. You know, those pilots that became the Brewers, me, and then some structural stuff. Before we got started, there was some talk around how Tacoma resembles Milwaukee, and I am excited to hear more about these kind of parallels and considerations around this topic. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, if you're watching live on the internet, you can feel free to drop questions, comments in the chat, either on YouTube or on Facebook. They'll make their way to our moderator here. And I'll remind you that we do have a Double Up campaign happening this festival, thanks to the generosity of Susan and Bob Michelet. If you contribute to us during the 15 days of the festival, they're going to match that. And you can do that by texting Double Up to 44321. By joining us as a Milwaukee Film member, if you're not already a member, any donation counts. Any dollar helps. It takes a village to raise that money. And as a nonprofit, Milwaukee Film is really grateful to the support of our community, of Bob and Susan, of course, but to all of you for helping us kind of get to that goal to continue to be able to provide programming like this for free, offering that access. So if you have any opportunity to give, please do consider making a donation. And that's all I've got. I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to hand the stage, the virtual stage, over to our moderator for this afternoon's panel. And welcome, Dr. Rob Biko Baker. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dr. Rob Biko Baker. I'm an instructor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the African and African Diaspora Studies Department and the founder of a digital storytelling firm called Render. And I'll be your moderator for today. I'm especially thankful to the organizers of the Milwaukee Film Festival and the filmmakers and the subjects of these two very important films. When Claude Got Shot is a powerful documentary that follows the journey of Claude Motley and his family after he was shot by 15-year-old Nathan King during an attempted robbery. The documentary is set in our own hometown, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and was directed by Brad Lichtenstein, co-produced by Santana Coleman, and executive produced by one of my homies, Snoop Dogg. And Since I've Been Down is a dramatic chronicle of how gangs, fear, racism, and power arrested the development of Tacoma, Washington. It spotlights Kamonte Carter and follows his efforts as well as another group of prisoners as they break free from their fate and create a model of education that is transforming their lives. Since I've Been Down was directed by Gilda Shepard. Today, I hope to have a robust and insightful conversation about the role that the prison industrial complex plays in our lives and how all of us, regardless of our socioeconomic status or race, are impacted by the carceral state. But before we get started, I'd like to bring up our panelists and allow them to introduce themselves. Hello, panel. Thank you for joining us today. If you could just briefly introduce yourself and your role in the film or the films, and I'll throw it first to the director, Since I've Been Down, Gilda Shepard.
Hello, Dr. Baker, and thank you, Milwaukee Film Festival, for having my film, our film, in this wonderful festival. My name is Gilda Shepard. I'm the director, executive producer, and writer for the documentary Since I've Been Down. I'm also a professor of sociology, cultural and media studies at the Evergreen State College. Is that all you need?
That's perfect.
Okay.
So we'll throw it to the other director, Brad.
Hi, thanks for having us. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. Loved the other film Since I've Been Down. My name's Brad Lichtenstein. I'm the director of When Claude Got Shot and the founder of 371 Productions here in Milwaukee.
That's right. And I'll throw it to Santana, who is the co-producer. And I've realized the importance of co-producers. They're so important. So Santana.
Thank you. Yes, you got it right, Santana. I am also very happy to be here, and I also loved Since I've Been Down. And yes, I'm Santana Coleman. I am the co-producer for When Claude Got Shot. And I'm very excited to be here, very excited to see all these other films at Milwaukee Film, and very excited for people to learn more about our film and Since I've Been Down.
And then brother Claude Motley, whose journey had me crying in my office at No Studios a couple months ago when I watched the film. Like, this is a strong brother, right? I couldn't be this strong.
Thank you, Dr. Biko. Dr. Biko Baker. I really appreciate that, and I like to say thank you to Milwaukee Films for bringing my picture home. One of the things that I definitely wanted to participate in is Milwaukee Film Festival, because this story is about Milwaukee. Since I've Been Down is a story about all of us. We were talking about that earlier, and I'm sure that the crossroads between what we see for both those stories is so familiar to everyone. And but yes, like I said, thank you, Milwaukee Film Festival. Thank you, Dr. Baker. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, and I appreciate all of you. And if you're wondering what the Carceral State is, basically we're talking about the prison industrial complex. And this Milwaukee Film Festival, and I would be remiss not to highlight that Wisconsin has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. We lock up 676 people per 100,000 people. There's currently 41,000 people behind Wisconsin's bars. And then we know each year at least 130,000 different people go in and out of the prison industrial complex. And anybody that is from Milwaukee would tell you, Black people, especially Black men, are the hardest hit by the prison industrial complex. And it's not even close, and unfortunately, this has been a theme that's been going on since I was a kid in the 90s. But I really like both of these films because I think it does a lot to shatter the stereotypes of Black men, especially. And, first to the filmmakers, these are films that are often not told, and I'm sure it's not easy to get funding for because it doesn't fit the traditional stereotype of Black men. But why was it important for each of you to tell these stories, and what do you think the world will gain from watching both of your films? I can throw it to either Gilda or Brad.
You're a guest in our hometown, Gilda, so you go first.
See, that is really a beautiful sign of an excellent director, right? He's giving, he makes sense, he helps the story open like that. So thank you, Brad. First of all, thank you for your film. And I've been telling people, characters in my film, about how you directed the film. That's very important. How we tell the story, how we embrace the story of our characters or our subjects. It's very important for us as filmmakers, even though we have some proximity to that. We have this opportunity, not necessarily obligation, opportunity to do this. So thank you. So the question, tell me again, because I got all involved in congratulating Brad and Claude.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what is your motivation for this film?
Okay. Well, I love children. And what we hear a lot are statistics. And statistics don't breathe life into the stories, nor do they talk about the foundational things that brought children to, I dare say, a non-negotiable pathway to joining gangs and those kinds of things. I think it is extremely important to talk about restorative justice. But I also think that's extremely important. But I also think that, as this one guy said, how we punish says as much about us as those we punish, right? What kind of policies do we keep plucking people up and throwing them in prison, and this thing still goes on? Because we think that, yes, people going to prison does have an impact on some members. But as Brad and Claude, and I'm sure Santana would agree, that our stories are not just stories about Milwaukee, not just stories about Tacoma, Washington, not just stories about these states, but these are stories. This is a master narrative that we see what's happening to our children. But we also see that now, that this is not just a slow fade in the gore. That there are policies, particularly the policies of the 80s and 90s, 3 strikes you're out, hard time for armed crime and all of that. And we know there's a lot of victims. But as Claude, I think he said, this kid is a victim too. Victims are perpetrators, perpetrators are victims. We look at the policies that come up. You know, I look at gentrification. First thing with gentrification is a lot of policing, right? And policing, and then people who look like me and the kids look like me, we want to clean it up, not realizing that cleaning it up is not bringing more resources for these children, for also public health things. I dare say environmental kinds of ecology kinds of things, and trainings, and even jobs for their parents. You know, it pushes them in prison, and so it becomes this. This kind of justice that is punitive. And I dare say it's not justice. It is not justice. It is punitive. And so, I mean, I started this film when I was working in this refugee camp, and this woman refugee told me, she said, you know, Sis Gilda, the same AK-47 that you see in the hands of child soldiers in the Civil War in Liberia are in your children's hands. You need to do something about that. And I dare say some of the global problems has systemic reasons from colonialism, but don't get me started. Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Brad, you want to jump in there?
Sure. Thank you, Gilda. And I just want to, first of all, echo that what Gilda has said about the system and the importance of telling stories to try to take audiences into an understanding of the systems that oppress us and the systems that hold us back through the stories of real people. And just to go back a little ways, I've basically known since I was 15 that I wanted to do something to make the world a better place by the time I left it. And that really just comes from my exposure to John Lewis and working for his campaign when I was a 15-year-old boy. And I discovered film about the time I was about 20 during an internship with a civil rights organization in Atlanta, where I grew up. And I really discovered early on when I was interning at Southern Regional Council, it was called, they were doing they weren't called podcasts then, I guess they were called radio shows. But anyway, they were working on a civil rights history called Will the Circle Be Unbroken with a woman named Verta Mae Grosvenor, who I got to meet several times and got to listen to the stories. And I had read about the civil rights movement, of course, but something different happens when you become immersed in a story. And that's really kind of where the bug bit me. And then without going into a whole thing, cut to 2014, Claudia and I have been friends since I moved to Milwaukee. So 2003, our sons are close buds and grew up together until Claude moved his family to Charlotte. But then when Claude would come back and he would visit with his family, everybody would fan out, and some parts of the family would stay with us at different times. In this particular instance, Sol was with us, and I was the one who had to tell him that his daddy had been shot. So I probably knew somewhere in my subconscious in that moment that this is a story that should be told, but it didn't really come to the conscious part and start into showing up in conversation until probably a few days, maybe even a week or so after Claude was recovering back at our house And already he and his wife, Kim, were starting to think about the importance of putting a face to this story, because so often we hear about gun violence and all we see are flashing lights and yellow tape and maybe a body, nothing about life. And that was really the impetus for me, is how do we follow this and show people the effects of gun violence on human terms.
Thank you. So we just been joined by Tanya, but before I let her introduce herself, I'm going to throw it to Santana. Santana, how did it feel? I've heard that your film took over a couple years to make. As a producer, what were some of the obstacles of tackling a subject that is as deep as this?
Well, I think the main thing that took a long time is really just following these real people's lives. And as you can see throughout the film, obviously Claude goes through a flux of emotions and decisions and life changes over the course of a few years. And so it's obviously imperative that we follow that. Then the justice system, of course, you have to take into account that it takes a few years for Nathan to get sentenced and how he's doing after sentencing and things like that. So that all takes some time as well. And then just kind of breaks to deal with the technical things in the background, to kind of build up partnerships and find editors and, a lot of the, it's interesting to me, but I'll say boring for the audience who are like here to listen to the context of the film stuff. So it was a lot of that stuff, but it was definitely an interesting journey because I came in straight from college. And I started as an intern on the film and then kind of worked my way up to co-producer. And this was my first film straight out of college. And when I heard that this is what I was going to be working on, I was so excited. And then that excitement, that energy just grew over the years as I got to know the subjects, as I got to know the whole process behind making a real documentary, because the documentaries I made in college, I like to think were not real, I guess. And so it was definitely
they were real.
Okay, they were real. They were real. just different. But the process over those years definitely was something that I was like very impatient with at first, because it was just like the excitement of like wanting this film to finally be released, because throughout the process I could see all the good that it was going to do. And now that it's years later, I feel like it definitely came right on time. And as I was watching Since I've Been Down, to see the similarities was like, what are the chances that we are here at the Milwaukee Film Fest at the exact same time, talking about this exact issue, all the issues we're dealing with in Milwaukee. It was just the perfect time. We can't hear you.
I want to unmute. I'm sorry. We're joined by Tanya Wilson. Tanya, do you want to introduce yourself?
I think you did a perfect job. Hi, everybody. My name is Tanya, and I'm really glad to be here.
So, Tanya, where do you work? Tanya's a re-entry specialist, right, for the Freedom Project.
Yeah, I work with the Freedom Project, and we have been delivering nonviolent communication in prisons internationally for decades, but the executive director position was taken over by someone who was impacted by the legal system, named David Hepard, a few years ago, and it has breathed new life into that organization. Now everything we do is with a racial and social justice equity lens, and really about standing in the gap for people who have been on the inside and who are transitioning out, who need help in living their lives, basically. So that's what I get to do, thankfully, and help people with whom I walk the tears with. So yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your story. It's never easy to do that, especially online on live stream. So thank you. I'd like to throw it to Brother Claude. Brother Claude, when I was on Clubhouse with you a couple of weeks ago, I had to shout you out. I'm like, man, brother, you strong, brother. And I saw you outside of No Studios about a week or so ago. And I think the most powerful part of your story for me is like when you reveal that you are a real Milwaukee dude, you know, and you know what I mean. And the fact that you are around this personal journey, you know, I think is very powerful. And do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the story and how you ended up in this documentary?
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to take up the whole rest of the meeting, so I will try to be as brief as I can. But I'm born and raised in Milwaukee. You know, one of the things that we talk about, the similarities of these two movies, I'm impacted. All the things that we saw when we in the beginning of before I was since I've been down, it's things that impacted my life. You know, all those things, all those stories have been intertwined. You know, and I don't want to, you know, paint a picture that, you know, living in Milwaukee is just negative or living in Tacoma is negative. I mean, we have loving families. I love Milwaukee. I love all my family in Milwaukee. And I'm that person that the reason why I am the person I am is because of Milwaukee. But we also understand that when we come down to the, you know, things that you just mentioned, we always have that struggle. We're always fighting. You know, one of the things that was strong to me that I saw in since I've been down was as Keontae, and I don't want to get into it too hard, but Keontae was looking to get clemency, and they cut to a picture when he was talking to the guard, and it kind of represented the change in Keontae, as in, hey, listen, now I am a upstanding person that needs this opportunity. And the thing that I thought about that was, we're always doing that. I'm always doing that. I'm about to go for my bar, and I'm sitting with my bar exam. I'm about to study for my bar exam, but I'm always looking for that you know, that you know, that somebody tell me that it's okay, that I'm a person that is qualified for this, you know. And I'm all, you know, because we're always striving, because we always know that we have something that's going to be pushing us back, and we're also fearful of that, you know, that one wrong choice, that one bad decision we make, you know, that's going to you know, really put us in jeopardy. So, you know, and so the thing about it is that this situation that happened to me, it was random. You know, I was back at home, going for my 25th class reunion, and this young man, you know, decided to, you know, carjack the car that I was in as I was dropping my friend off. Ended up shooting me, and the sad thing about the whole situation is that when I got a chance to, when you start to formulate and thinking of the why, it was no why there. You know, it was just a matter of these kids are so influenced by their environment and the hopelessness and the negativity that overcomes all the positive that they could do, you know. And so when I decided to do this film, what I wanted to do was not just show people that, you know, that I'm a victim of crime, but I wanted to show people that I'm a survivor of crime, that I'm a person that have been equipped with the tools to not only be able to speak about this, but have the empathy to go ahead and say that, you know, this is not about anger. This is about caring, about changing the situation. Do we care enough about our city? Do we care enough about the people that's in our city to actually make a difference? You know, and can we do that? And that's what, and so that was the impetus of me going forward. And when me and Brad sat down and talked, and we decided that we could probably go ahead and look and talk about this on a bigger stage, it became, you know, it just became something that was beautiful, very hard to do, very long road, but it was worth it. It was definitely worth it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worth it for, you know, I'm sure for yourself, but also for the world. And something you just brought up on is, you know, brothers in Milwaukee often have a survivor's guilt. You know, people who have made it out of the hood, and you know, they feel like, man, I don't know how I made it, because I sure probably shouldn't have. And then oftentimes imposter syndrome, you know, and you know, for our success. And Brother Claude, I encourage you to take as much time as you need whenever you talk about your story, because it's going to help a lot of people. And hopefully all of you have gotten a chance to see it. But this Brother Claude, at the end of this film, you know, looks back at the brother that shot him, a young brother, kid, and you know, you could tell this young brother almost wanted you to be his father. And I don't know if I could have sat in the same position as you, sir, because yeah, I'd have took my belt out. But that's another conversation. I'm not going to go to jail. Gilda, can you tell us a little bit about Kamanti? Hopefully he'll join us. But can you tell us a little about his story and why you chose to zero in on his story?
Because I think his story is the story of many young people. I don't want people just to say that this is Kamanti's story. This story is to free Kamanti. This story is for what we do to our children, right? Children who come from, so to speak, good families. Nate, two-family household, a parent household, good neighborhood. Why does it happen to him? So it's not just those ghettos in Milwaukee or the ghettos in Tacoma. It is particularly what happens to Black men, but I dare say Black women too. But anyway, I've been teaching in the prisons I'm still teaching in the prisons. And it took me 12 years. Are you ready for that, Santana? 12 years to finish this film. I got to meet, and so I went from Professor Shepard to Auntie Gilda to Mama G. So I was able to go into people's basements and get their old VHS tapes of them throwing up gang signs, and then them talking to me, having respect for me as an elder about some things that happened to them. You know, what happened when the father came home with PTSD from Vietnam? What happened when the crack epidemic hit Tacoma, Washington, and no one had a job, and they didn't want their brothers and sisters. I am not making apologies, but I'm looking at all the situation. So whenever I teach a class, you know, like over 12 years ago, I always start my sociology class with this concept called Sociological Imagination, and it looks at all the social forces in history that inform a person's life. So I brought it to my sociology classroom where Kamanti was my first class. And all of a sudden, these brothers and white guys and Latinx and indigenous guys, they started talking about policies and that. I thought to myself, I thought I'm supposed to bring that to you. Well, you know this. So I had to look at how I look at them too. Okay? How I look at them. I'm shocked that you're articulate. So I said, well, but wait. Where are you getting this information? I realized that these gentlemen were organizing in the prison, a group called the Black Prisoners Caucus, a 40-year organization. Do we know anything about this? No. And I dare say that's probably a kind of a prisoner-initiated groups in many of the prisons, because where there's oppression, there is possibility. It's not like people just say, okay, come on, let's give it to me. That kind of thing. There are some people who are casualties. Let us be clear. I mean, like Claude said, I could have been a casualty. And I loved it when Claude said, when he asked about what should we do with Nate, he says, I'm conflicted because I want the community to heal too. And so I was like, wow, right? So I never think about taking my belt off. I look at them as Claude said. Claude said, and when he saw him face to face and he was there, he said, you know, you're a kid, 15 years old, right? And so you know, you wonder like, and I would talk to the guys in my classroom and I said, who failed you? And I'm not talking about their parents. They talked about issues and policies. That's where I want to take my belt off and smack these issues and policies. And so with our film, because of film like Claude got shot, you know, and since I've been down, I use that I'm speaking at the Washington State Supreme Court. You know, I'm like, oh Lord, you know, and I'm talking to people. Tanya Wilson was one of the most brilliant people in my classroom at Evergreen State College. I opened my eyes and I realized that she had an ankle bracelet, right? I mean, she's brilliant. I mean, to tell you, she's brilliant. And reads all the time, right? And but not only reads, her analysis of things. And then next time I saw her, I was given a keynote at the women's prison, because I want to tell you, the women's prison, we talk about the men and Black men and all that. Yes, that's true. The women's prison, the population has gone up about 500%, but we don't think about that. Mm-hmm. And when a man goes to prison, who takes care of the kids? But when a woman goes to prison, who takes care of the kids? And how do we continue in that vein, you know, that thing? And there's Tanya. Tanya and her colleagues started a group in the women's prison called the Women's Village. The women's prison was the most violent prison in Washington State. When they started that group, violence went down by 50%.
Mm-hmm.
That's not magic. It's like Kamanti says, it's one thing studying the subject, is another thing being it. Right? You know, and you got to stop me because I got the gift of gab. You know, and I'm passionate about this. And that's the reason why we want to bring Claude to Washington State.
Absolutely. We have to talk right before so we can get all that out of our system.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And the gift of gab, it feels like there's a lot of passion and love there, which is probably the most important element of redeeming anything in our society. It's not talked about enough, but we'll talk about that later. But Brad, you know, as a white filmmaker, you know, I think you did an excellent job of not centering the film around yourself, you know, and as a documentarian, I know that's sometimes difficult to do just tactically. Like, how do you tell a story and not put yourself in the center of the story? And so, you know, can you tell us a little bit about your decision about, you know, how you told the story and, you know, how you struggled maybe with positioning yourself in the film?
Sure. The realities of COVID. I have to tell my dog to be quiet. Archie, come here. Come here. Okay. We're all good. So I think you're touching on a couple of things. One, I wouldn't say the risk was so much centering the story on me in terms of what's in the film, because I've been making films for a long time where my goal is always really to sort of serve as a platform and create the conditions for participants in the story to be their most authentic selves in front of the camera. But I think the bigger risk is to extract a story that is not yours to tell. And actually, my colleagues in documentary have been having this discourse for a while. In our world, you know, we have conferences that we go to and so forth. I have to call out a young man named Eddie Martinez, younger than me, I should say, who really called this out to our community in 2013. And, you know, there's certain stories that I think a white filmmaker shouldn't tell. And this is actually one of them. I think the only exception would be where there's a loving and caring relationship already in place. And this happened to be the exception. And you know, and that's a high bar. You know, if Claude and I had not been such close friends, and if he and I already had not had that trust, then I'd say my duty would be, if I found a story like this, would be to find a wonderful filmmaker of color to tell this story. And by extractive, just let me dig into that to extend the metaphor, but we use that very purposefully because we see how often people come from other communities to tell another community's story, and extract in the sense that you would extract a gem and go sell it on the market. And you know, that metaphor sounds violent, and it should, because it is violent and it's been going on for a long, long time. So I would say in this particular case, I approached this with a lot of trepidation. And what's interesting too is, you know, we had this conversation quite a few times sort of behind the scenes. In some ways, I sort of shielded Claude from having this conversation too much because he's going through enough, just getting his life back on track. But I can share with the audience that so I'm close to Claude's wife, Kim, also. And there were a couple of times where she kept urging me to be in the film. And what was behind that was kind of the same motivation, which was to call attention to the fact that I'm white, and to also call attention to the friendship. So we actually have in our outtakes, for instance, some footage that Kim sort of, I'll say, made me shoot while we were at the hospital one time, which was an attempt to kind of figure that piece out. But I think at the end of the day, you know, the decision not to put me in the film was precisely so that there's not confusion about who this story is centered on.
That's that's a as a storyteller, I know that that's a difficult dance, the role of the first person, and I really think that it's well done, you know, even and I think it gives space for the subjects to really own their story, which I feel is I think will come across to national audiences in a way that I think is pretty amazing. So tell me a little bit about like where, besides the film festival, what's the future of these films? I know that when Claude got shot, it's gonna come on PBS. I think I might have heard that. Is that a rumor? Maybe I might just be sharing inside baseball. I don't want to get too far in front of the game.
No, that's public. No, we are committed to a broadcast on Independent Lens with PBS. And then the behind the scenes part is we are in conversations with a few different distribution companies around some other platforms. So, you know, the goal is to get as many people to see it as possible. And then, you know, I think Gilda will appreciate this too. But the other goal is to really use the film as a tool for change. And so we're partnering with a group that I'm super excited to be partnering with. They're called that's their website, wearetheleague.com. It's called The League, led by incredible woman, Tracy Sturdivant, who had been involved in some of the cultural work around the campaigns for voter registration in Georgia and a lot of other great campaigns. And so they are going to be helping us form partnerships and strategy to make sure, you know, as I said, it took us 5.5 years to make it. So I'd like at least 5.5 good years of impact to come from the film.
Gilda, I know that I've noticed that the film has been in a couple other film festivals. What's the future of your film?
Well, right now we have someone who's talking about distribution. We have Passion River, who is talking to everybody about the possibility of distribution. We want to grow up and be like when Claude got shot, you know, we want a lovely deal like that. Because of what Brad just said. You know, this is public education. We hear statistics. We see, you know, all kinds of things happening in poor and people of color communities, but we don't see the possibility of compassion. And we have a very strong impact campaign. Angela Davis saw the film and she was on a panel with me. Yeah, and Adrienne Mary Brown saw the film and we wanted, so people see the film and they want to be on the panel. We won the Social Justice Gold Prize and one of the best in the fest is Doc NYC and those kinds of things. So you know, it's getting its play. I can't wait to show it in prisons. There's a possibility of this one group called American, it's APDS, and it has a tablets in prisons, and that the folks who are incarcerated can use in 90 prisons nationally, and they will possibly, if they can, put Since I've Been Down on those platforms of people in prison. Because there's one thing to change on the outside, that's extremely important, this policy changes, to look at education and racial equity. What does that really mean? Right? You know, but also so that the folks inside prison can see possibilities and people who look like them doing certain things. I mean, to have a guy with swastikas all over him talk about, I have something in common with somebody from Central America, that we have a similar enemy, you know, what? You know, those kinds of things. But also to look at, you know, how people cross gang lines, be them the Southern or Northern California Latinx gangs coming together and talking to one another. We want to look at reentry stuff. But yeah, we see this as a popular education tool. So we want to definitely, that's one of the big impacts. But, you know, we're talking to Jewish and Christian communities. They want to put it together here in Washington State and then in Atlanta. Tanya, and I always have Tanya and Kamanti, I hope he comes on, speak with me after a festival, after it's being shown. And Tanya and I are going to be speaking, doing a workshop for the Correctional Education of America, national one in Arizona. So, we want to be on the ground doing things, but we want to also be, in a popular education tool like TV so that folks can see it. And we have a curriculum that we want to put together for schools as well. I mean, people need to see themselves. It's like Claude said, but also what Kamanti said, you can never be a different person, but you can be a better version of who you are. And some people don't know that. I mean, to meet a kid, I met a person who's been in prison since he was 13, and he did kill someone, killed a little girl, right? And he's been in prison longer than he's been alive. He got out after being in prison for 22 years. And he's doing phenomenal work, right? But it's the work of Tanya when she says, what is reentry? But it's another thing for someone who has been down to talk about, to be at the table about that reentry. And Brad, I want to say for you saying that, I don't want to be in it, we always are because we're the director, but I really appreciate what you said, because, it could be like, here he comes, the great white hope, you know what I mean? And I know it, and you didn't want that, it was about Claude and the Claudes of the world and the neighborhoods of the world, I'm going to show the film in Ghana, West Africa, like I said, child soldiers. That's the reason I have masks in my film. I saw kids of child soldiers being a child soldier as young as 11, just like kids join gangs as young as 11. And we can talk about the conditions that led these kids to be in child soldiers. And they wore masks and little capes and things as if because they were children. One guy said, I felt like I was in a cartoon. So, I mean, how do we do that? So, and I think that is these kinds of conversations that, and I'm glad to hear that you're going to go for the bar again. Yes. And you have a beautiful family, Claude.
Thank you very much.
Family.
I appreciate that. I really do.
So Claude, not only did this incident disrupt you physically, but professionally, economically, your healthcare bills, that is why I probably would have been the most angry, just seeing, this debt that you didn't deserve, hit you so hard. How did you feel seeing your story and your family story for the first time on the screen? And, how have you changed since seeing yourself?
Well, let me, I don't want to minimize the stress that this put on my, my family, but, one of the things that I talk about all the time is that, I think that growing up in Milwaukee, and I think everybody in Milwaukee has a level of PTSD, that they grow up and live with every single day because of the racism, because of the segregation, because of the atmosphere that they have to grow up in. And the thing about it is that once you try to strive in that environment, it allows you to have that thicker skin to allow you to go ahead and not only deal with those issues and those struggles, but to also think about your goals and how you're going to, go forward with that. So the thing about it is that one of the things that we talk about, and my wife is she's an excellent lawyer right now. She's, we're dealing with social issues when it comes down to police shootings and things like that. And I would be a hypocrite to sit up there and say that I care more about my financial issues than a person's life, because that's what I talk about every day when we talk about police reform and things like that. What is more important, a riot that goes ahead and rips up a store, or that kid's life that was taken for no reason at all. And that's how I kind of looked at this situation. My struggles and things like that are going to be the struggles. If it wasn't one thing, it might have been another. But we're talking about the bigger issue, and we're talking about lives that are being lost every single day because of choices that they don't actually have. They think they have, but they don't. They're put into situations, and that's the bigger issue to go ahead and start to talk about changing those things. Because once those things change, my life gets easier. I don't have to worry about those things. Once those things change, my child's life is going to be easier. And what are we here for if we're not trying to make our kids' lives better? And that's how I see it. And the thing about it is that if we continue to go down this road of where we think that punishment and revenge is going to get us different results, and we continue to get the same results, what's the point? So how I've changed is because I've grown. I've grown even more because you're right. I was angry. I mean, how can you not be angry? It wasn't my fault. You talked about survivor's guilt. I'm also dealing with that. I left. I left at a time when it was tough for me personally and things like that. And also then this happens. And so, so I had to really dig down deep and just find out what type of person do I want to be? What type of person do I want my kids to see me as? And what type of person do I want my family? What kind of example am I going to show? I'm trying to go for my bar because I want to make a difference in my community. And even though I'm not barred right now as a lawyer, I am making a difference. And that's the most important thing to me. So, financially, we're going to be stressed. I'm going to be stressed. And that's half this country is stressed on financials. So that's not the important factor. The important factor is that I want to take the stress off that we can go ahead and actually have control of. And that's going ahead and investing in our children. And we can take away some of that stress and start having compassion and start I want people to start looking at us and looking at me and start look at it as freedom and equality and not have some type of asterisk by those things, So, that's how I handle it. That's how I handle it.
Well, I appreciate that. We have about 10 more minutes or maybe 8 more minutes, but I want to throw this to the entire group and panel. We have some, we have some folks on Facebook. If you comment on Facebook, I can see it. So, throw some questions on the chat and I'll try to get them in, but, and this can go for anyone on the panel. What are we getting wrong in the criminal justice sector, and what are we getting right? Obviously the war on drugs and impact of the 1994 crime bill have come under the microscope recently with the election of President Joe Biden, and during the campaign, it was every meme I saw on the internet was about that. But what are we getting wrong, and are we getting anything right today? Hopefully Tanya can hear us, maybe jump in if she's interested in jumping in.
Thanks. I was thinking about what it takes to really make a change in the way that things are moving forward in this country. And this is just my personal belief. I don't feel like I don't know how well informed this is, except for my own experience. And I think that people really need to first keep eyes on these kinds of issues, because if we just say, okay, we've discussed it and we've either been successful or not successful, and then it fades into the background, then we failed at what we've attempted to do. But I really think that, as hard as it seems, that if we're going to have any sector of society needs to be represented by all of these people. So in order for us to change something, then we have to be a part of every single portion of the society. And unfortunately for me, that means policing, but I think that it is imperative that people of color are part of policing and part of the group of people who make the laws of policing. Because without that representation at all levels of society, then we're going to continue to get this skewed view of what justice is. And I think that we need to see the possibilities by seeing ourselves in each one of those possibilities. And what I mean by that is, it's difficult to take a sense of justice and to codify it, and to not take our internalized oppression and our internalized racism and not let that show up as quote unquote fairness, the project was going to be difficult, but we can't be left out of anything. Like, all people need to be a part of all parts of that. And I think that right now at this point, the part that we are most in need of being in leadership for is policy making. And so until people who have had our experience, our lived experience, are the people who are making the policies, which means that they're the ones who are running for the local governments, then it's going to continue to be like this. And it can't be just on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I cut you off. I thought you had come to a pause, but I'll shut up. I did.
I could take the air out of a room too. So I'm gonna back up.
Well, we only got an hour, but I've learned a lot, and I appreciate everyone jumping on. So if each of you want to just close with a final statement, about 30 seconds or so, just so we can end the show the right way. And I'll start with you, Brad.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on something Tanya said to close. I was thinking as she talked about a moment in our film at sentencing, which is a moment where Claude, who is quote unquote the victim or survivor in this case, has asked for leniency, and the judge ignores him and gives the maximum amount that he's able to give Nate. And the judge says this thing where he says, I suspect, some of the problems that I have are different than the problems that you have. And I think that's the crux of the problem. I would stand at court all the time and observe that it was mostly white people who were in positions of judges, DAs, assistant DAs. It was mostly Black people who were showing up for hearings and were plaintiffs in lots of different matters. And in that moment, the judge, I think, reveals how different the lived experiences are between what he is going home to and what the person sitting at the table in front of him is going home to. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think Tanya's exactly right. Until we really, I think, move on two fronts. One is change the makeup of our systems and representation, and also start to remove all the I and replace it with a lot more we, so that we understand that this system belongs to all of us and we're all responsible for it. That, is how we're going to see the change that we want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Santana, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I did have a little bit to say, but it was definitely going to be more than 30 seconds. And seeing as how we have 4 minutes left, I'll keep my 30 seconds and say that I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate, all of these films really working to make a change in our communities and in our world. And I can't wait to see how we can use these films to do such a thing.
You can get a little bit more than that now, sis. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, the one thing that I was thinking is that, during this process, I definitely am learning a lot more about the policies and stuff, because I didn't know a lot about the justice system and Milwaukee justice system, is like more specifically, until I started working on this. And the one thing I will say that always stood out to me is that when Claude was meeting with the DA, they were talking about like our juvenile justice system here. Nathan would have got a maximum of 5 years, and he probably would have done maybe 3 of those. And then, of course, he AWOL'd and he went through all these things to have Claude then wave him over, or want to wave him over to adult court. And then, just as Brad talked about, Claude asked for leniency, but then he still ended up getting 20 years. And I think that the thing that really stood out to me is I'm still learning about the justice system in Milwaukee and just all over, is that there was no in between. Granted, of course, the judge could have made a different decision, like Brad just said, and he could have went with what Claude asked for. He could have went with 8 years. He could have went with 10 years or something like that. But I just know that during this process, I really found out that in Milwaukee, there was no in between. Either you don't get enough time as a juvenile at all, or you get way too much time, and it really has the possibility to institutionalize you. And so that was just kind of my findings. And I will just very quickly also add in that watching Since I've Been Down also had me conflicted, as I'm sure it had a lot of audience feeling when they watched both of these films, because we're still having a lot of teens do a lot of crazy shit in Milwaukee. And it really leaves you feeling like, where is the justice? What's going to happen to them? Why isn't anything happening? Why are they able to victimize so many people every day? But then you watch films like this and you're like, okay, I guess we don't want to lock them up, but like, you know, it really leaves you conflicted and feeling like, what can you do? So like I said, I'm just excited to be a part of the process and really learn more about what we can do and how we can use these films to really enact change in our communities.
Thank you. And then Gilda, Tanya, or Claude, when you want to jump in?
Well, listen, what I think that when we talk about the criminal justice system, we're talking about the people who are the most powerless in our society at this point in time. So the people that can make change about it is the people that are outside. And that starts with, I hate to, rephrase and take a sentence from Parliament, but once we free our minds, our actions will follow. And the thing about it is we have to stop thinking about prison system as as an end result and an ending for those people's lives. We have to talk about restarting people's lives. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about your movie, Gilda, was when you were showing the palm trees, the trees, and then they're being ruined, and then you came back and showed the regrowth of those trees. And it was very powerful to me because I have a brother that was in prison for 7.5 years. I have a brother-in-law that was in prison for 3 years. I have a nephew right now that's going to get out of prison in in August, and he's been in for 7 years. The prison system is part of our lives every single day. And those are our families, those are our loved ones, those are the people. We need to start thinking about how we deal with this whole situation in a more humane way, instead of saying, hey, listen, those people aren't useless in our society. So once we get that out of our minds, then those systems will start to change.
Thank you. And then Gilda or Tanya? Is Tanya? Any closing words for us?
I didn't know if Gilda was gonna speak or not. It is difficult. I heard all of the I heard Santana, and living on the side of the experience, and then being the person who is punished because of that experience is a hard thing. And I think that talking about young people who do heinous shit, and I think that we just need to figure out first why they do heinous shit. Like where does the lack of humanity reflect out from a child's heart and his actions? When somebody has a chance to live in their humanity, then for the most part, they give that back. They put out what they give, but they put out what they get. And we talk about when even children who have affluenza or who seem to be well off do these things, and it's about what kind of humanity they've been given. We give out what our reality is, and I think that until we start to see every one of us as human, regardless of our positionality in society, then nothing is going to heal, because you can have everything or have nothing, and showcase your humanity or your lack of it. And we're gonna live or die by that humanity of children. We're gonna live and die by the humanity that we give children. And that talks about what they need to be a fully functioning human being, whether it's sleep or food or clothing or the right to have possibilities, and to see other people around them who look like them have possibilities. That's what we're going to live. And it's that simple and that difficult at the same time, And so I just hope that project that we move forward doing includes the children that are here on this earth, because they inherited and they're going to give it back what they've been given. It's that simple.
That sounds a lot like love to me.
I told you she was brilliant.
Gilda?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I want to quote one of the people in the film that many scholars always say, and that's Mr. Zimbabwe. He says, I dare say that some of the answers to the day's problem can be found in prison. Now, you got to hold on to your seat with that quote, because I know game, okay? I'm not talking about everybody, but I think that these folks choose the margin as a place of radical possibility. And it is in spite of this culture of punishment. It is one thing to really see the triumph of the human spirit and experience that, and that really gets me. And I hope that Nathan, because we talked around him, I don't know what he's doing now. I hope he continues, and I hope he's fine. Is he okay, Claude?
Brad has more contact with his mother,
Okay.
but I think
But
from what I
just hope
understand, he's doing his
fine.
time. Yeah,
He's doing his time. But I do think that some of the folks that are in prison have gone through some of the worst things of our society. And I'm not just being essentialist and saying, so therefore the most oppressed has all the answers. But I do think that with a deep thought, they can see it. When I hear about Claude and he had pre-existing condition, that's prison. That's the culture of prison. Yes, we're all under this system, we're going to have some problems, but it's a doggone shame that if what happened to him didn't happen to him that way, pre-existing conditions, come on, there's a hidden injury of class. So that is reflection of punishment, the culture of punishment that we see coming from prisons. What the prisons do right and what the prisons do wrong, that in spite of that, sometimes we do see the triumph of the human spirit, because I do believe that people have the possibility, as Claude said with that metaphor, there's barren land, but still something can grow. It can happen. And when it happens, you just experience the most magnificent miracle that you have ever seen in your life. So I am so glad that I'm an artist, you know what I mean? And that I can embrace these stories and make a pathway, use my privilege, as Brad was indicating, in a responsible way as an artist. Because I do believe that artists just don't tell it like it is, or put a mirror up to society. I think art tells you what can be. And that's our magic. And that's what Kamanti, Claude, and Tanya, Santana, Dr. Biko, LaShonda, and Brad, that's what we do. That's what we try to do. And all of the Milwaukee Film Festival. How's that for a give back? Okay. Tell Kim hi.
I definitely will. I definitely will.
She's something else.
You gotta tell me.
Well,
I get a piece of that every day.
Anyway.
Well, I appreciate everyone for sharing your story and sticking with us for this whole hour. It's been a very powerful and enriching discussion. And to the folks following us on Facebook right now or YouTube, I encourage you to sign up for the Milwaukee Film Festival, get your tickets, watch these two films. I think that you will be enriched and see your own story in them. And I always say this, and I always like to close like this. Remember, there's no famous rapper that can come save you. There's no famous Superman or Superwoman that can come save you. We are the ones that we have always been waiting for. So it's up to us to get our hands dirty and change our community. Thank you all.